The land of Egypt trembled under the weight of its king's pride. Pharaoh sat on his golden throne, defiant and unshaken, while the cries of an enslaved people rose to the heavens. But when arrogance meets the command of the Almighty, history is rewritten with power that no mortal hand can resist. This is the story of 10 plagues, each one a strike against the idols of Egypt, each one a message that echoed louder than the last: let my people go. From rivers turning to blood, to swarms of frogs and locusts, to darkness swallowing the land, every plague revealed the weakness of false gods and the absolute authority of the Creator. And at the center of this clash stood 2 men, Pharaoh, wrapped in pride and stubbornness, and Moses, a reluctant prophet who now carried the voice of God himself. Their confrontation wasn't just political, it was spiritual, cosmic, eternal. One man demanded submission to human power, the other declared freedom through divine will. The Bible describes the plagues as judgments that shook Egypt's empire, while the Quran affirms them as signs that revealed God's supremacy over all creation. Together, they remind us that when human arrogance rises too high, the hand of God humbles it in ways the world cannot forget. So stay with us, because this story isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror for our times. What happens when pride blinds us to truth? What happens when power resists justice? And most of all, what happens when God says, enough? If you're ready to witness the unstoppable power of faith and the downfall of arrogance, then join us as we journey into the plagues of Egypt. And before we begin, make sure to hit subscribe, because this is a story you won't want to miss. The story begins not with thunder or lightning, but with a simple demand echoing in Pharaoh's golden halls: let my people go. Moses, once a shepherd in the desert, now stood in the courts of the most powerful empire of his time. His voice was steady, his staff firm in his hand, yet his words carried the authority of the Almighty. Pharaoh, cloaked in pride and arrogance, looked upon him as though he were nothing. To Pharaoh, the Hebrews were slaves, expendable laborers building monuments to his ego. To God, they were his chosen people, destined for freedom. When Pharaoh scoffed at the command, the first sign was unleashed. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline, turned into blood. Its waters, once the source of life and prosperity, now ran red and foul. Fish died, the stench filled the land, and the people's hearts trembled. Yet Pharaoh's heart hardened. He refused to see beyond his pride, convincing himself that his magicians could match such wonders. But the signs did not stop. Frogs swarmed the palaces, invading every corner of Egyptian life. Dust rose and became gnats, tormenting the people. Flies covered the land, bringing disease and despair. With each plague, Egypt's gods were exposed as powerless. The Nile god could not stop the river from bleeding, the god of fertility could not halt the frogs, and the sun god Ra could not prevent the land from being covered in darkness. Through each judgment, Moses stood firm, declaring, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go." The Bible paints these plagues as divine judgments against Egypt's oppression, while the Quran reminds us they were signs, sent so that Pharaoh and his people might turn back from arrogance. Yet, as the warnings grew louder, Pharaoh's resistance grew stronger. Imagine the tension in those days, the Hebrews watching in awe as their God struck down the empire that enslaved them, the Egyptians trembling as their world unraveled, and Pharaoh, seated on his throne, refusing to bend, even as his kingdom crumbled around him. The plagues were not random acts of destruction. They were deliberate, each one striking at the heart of Egypt's pride. God was not only freeing his people, he was revealing that no power, no empire, no king, and no idol can stand against his will. And so the stage was set, the greatest confrontation in the ancient world, one man hardened by arrogance, and another man carrying the voice of God. The world was about to witness that the strength of empires is nothing compared to the strength of the Almighty. Pharaoh's pride was like stone, unshaken, unbroken, even as the plagues tore through his land. With every sign, the people of Egypt begged him to surrender, yet he refused. His pride had become his prison. The plagues grew more severe. Livestock, the wealth of the Egyptians, perished in the fields. The sound of their dying echoed across the land, leaving behind silence and emptiness where once there had been abundance. Then came boils, painful sores covering every Egyptian, from the nobles in their golden chambers to the servants in the fields. Their skin burned, their cries filled the air, but still Pharaoh would not bend. The sky itself became a weapon. Thunder roared and lightning split the heavens, as hail fell like stones of fire upon Egypt. Crops were destroyed, trees shattered, and the people ran for shelter, trembling in fear. For a brief moment, Pharaoh's mask cracked. He called Moses and admitted, "I have sinned, pray to your God to stop this storm." Moses prayed, and the skies cleared. Yet when the danger passed, Pharaoh's heart hardened once more. But God's power pressed forward. Locusts swept over the land in a wave so vast the sky darkened. They devoured every leaf, every stalk, every green thing left standing. Egypt, once a land of prosperity, now looked like a barren wasteland. The people were desperate. Pharaoh's advisors pleaded, "Let them go. Do you not see that Egypt is ruined?" Still, Pharaoh clung to his pride, as if holding on to chains that dragged him deeper into destruction. Then came darkness, not the quiet shade of night, but a suffocating gloom that swallowed the land. For 3 days, no Egyptian could move. It was as though the sun itself had abandoned them. Yet in the land of the Hebrews, light still shone. The contrast was undeniable. The God of Moses was not only punishing, he was protecting his people, showing them that he alone controlled life, death, and light. In those days, the people of Egypt were broken. They had seen their river bleed, their homes invaded, their bodies wounded, their skies burn, their fields consumed, and their light extinguished. Everything they trusted was crumbling. Yet Pharaoh stood like a man blind to truth, deaf to reason, chained by his own arrogance. Both the Bible and the Quran echo this truth. Pharaoh's arrogance was his downfall. He had every chance to submit, every chance to turn away from cruelty, but his heart refused. The plagues were not simply punishments, they were opportunities to recognize God's sovereignty, to repent, to be humbled. But Pharaoh chose pride over surrender, destruction over mercy. Each plague was a warning shot, each one louder than the last, until Egypt itself was brought to its knees. And the stage was being prepared for the final, devastating act, the judgment that would shatter Pharaoh's pride forever. The land of Egypt had been shaken, broken, and humbled. Yet Pharaoh's heart remained harder than the stones of his palace. He had watched the Nile turn to blood, felt the sky rain fire, seen darkness cover his land, but still he clung to arrogance. The plagues were not enough. One final judgment remained, one that would pierce the heart of every Egyptian home. God spoke to Moses, a night of deliverance was coming, but also a night of sorrow. Every firstborn in Egypt would die, from the heir to Pharaoh's throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, even to the firstborn of the cattle in the fields. This was not just a punishment, it was the ultimate sign that life and death were in the hands of God alone. But for the people of Israel, a path of mercy was opened. They were commanded to take the blood of a lamb and mark it upon their doors. The blood would be a sign, a shield, a promise. When the angel of death passed through Egypt, it would pass over the homes marked in faith. This moment gave birth to one of the most sacred traditions in history, the Passover, remembered for generations by Jews, and echoed in both Christian and Islamic faith as a moment of God's saving power. And so the night came. Egypt was silent, waiting, unaware of the storm about to break. At midnight, cries rose up in every household. The firstborn sons lay lifeless in their beds. From the palaces of the rich to the homes of the poor, death spared no one. Even Pharaoh's own son, the heir to his kingdom, was taken. The man who claimed to be a god was left powerless in the face of the true God's judgment. The sound of weeping filled the land, a sorrow so deep it could never be forgotten. In the Bible's account, there was not a house without someone dead. In the Quran, Pharaoh is shown as a tyrant who denied the truth until it was too late, and this final punishment was a sign of God's justice. Both scriptures agree, no pride, no kingdom, no army can stand against God's will. At last, Pharaoh's resistance broke. In his grief, he summoned Moses in the dead of night and shouted, "Go! Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said. And bless me also." His arrogance was shattered. His defiance turned into desperation. For the Hebrews, this night was freedom. They gathered quickly, eating in haste, their walking staffs in hand, ready to leave behind centuries of slavery. It was the moment their identity was reborn, no longer slaves, but a people chosen, delivered, and guided by the hand of God. The death of the firstborn was not simply tragedy, it was a turning point in history. A night that showed the cost of arrogance, the power of obedience, and the depth of God's justice. It was a night Egypt would never forget, and Israel would forever remember. The night of terror had ended, but the story was not finished. With the cries of Egypt still echoing in the distance, the people of Israel gathered in haste. Their bread had not even risen, they carried unleavened dough on their shoulders as they walked into the darkness. For the first time in 400 years, they were not slaves, they were free. But freedom did not come without fear. Behind them, the shadow of Pharaoh loomed. Though broken by grief, his pride had not truly died. Soon after releasing them, his heart hardened once more. With fury burning in his chest, he rallied his chariots, the finest army in the world, to chase the fleeing slaves. He swore that he would drag them back in chains or bury them in the desert. The Israelites found themselves trapped. Ahead of them stretched the endless waters of the Red Sea. Behind them thundered the hooves of Pharaoh's horses, their wheels churning up clouds of dust. Panic filled the camp. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers trembled with despair. Many cried out, "Was it for lack of graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die in the wilderness?" In that moment of terror, Moses stood tall. He did not flinch. With a voice filled with divine authority, he declared, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again." And then it happened. Moses raised his staff, and the wind of heaven swept across the waters. The sea raged and roared, but suddenly the waves began to split apart. Walls of water rose higher and higher on both sides, while the seabed before them became dry ground. A golden path stretched forward, illuminated by divine light piercing the stormy night. With awe and trembling, the Israelites stepped forward. Families, children, the elderly, all walked between towering walls of water, their faces lit by faith and fear. Behind them, the fiery presence of God stood like a shield, holding Pharaoh's army at bay until the last Israelite had entered the path. But Pharaoh was blinded by rage. He ordered his chariots to pursue. His warriors stormed into the seabed, the sound of wheels and war cries echoing against the waters. For a moment it seemed they would overtake the Israelites. But then the wheels of their chariots grew heavy, sinking into the mud. Confusion spread through their ranks. They realized too late that they were not fighting men, they were fighting God. As the last Israelite stepped onto the opposite shore, Moses stretched out his hand once more. The walls of water crashed back with unstoppable fury. Chariots, horses, soldiers, all were swallowed by the sea. The waves closed in, leaving no trace of the once mighty Egyptian army. Pharaoh's power had drowned beneath the very waters he thought would trap his enemies. On the far shore, the Israelites stood in stunned silence, the wind whipping around them, the sea roaring behind them. They were free. Truly free. Not by their strength, but by the hand of God. That night, their song rose into the heavens, a song of victory, of faith, of deliverance. The Exodus was more than an escape. It was a revelation, that when all seems lost, when the enemy surrounds you, and when the waters block your way, God can split the sea and make a path where none existed before the Red Sea was behind them. The enemy was gone. The sound of crashing waves still echoed in their ears, but now the desert stretched endlessly before them. The people of Israel were finally free, yet freedom carried its own weight. They were no longer slaves of Pharaoh, but now they had to learn to live as the people of God. The wilderness tested them in ways Egypt never had. The sun blazed mercilessly during the day, and the cold bit deeply at night. Thirst gnawed at their throats, hunger pressed against their stomachs, and fear whispered in their hearts. Again and again, they grumbled against Moses, "Why did you bring us out here? Better to have died in Egypt than to perish in the desert." Yet, in every complaint, God revealed his mercy. When their mouths dried with thirst, Moses struck a rock, and water gushed forth like a river. When their bellies ached with hunger, bread from heaven, manna, rained down each morning, white like frost, nourishing their bodies and teaching them to trust God daily. And when enemies rose against them in the wilderness, God's hand fought for them, proving that their deliverance was not finished at the sea, it was only beginning. But the most profound moment came when they reached Mount Sinai. The mountain loomed high, its peak shrouded in thick clouds and trembling with fire. Thunder roared, lightning cracked, and the earth shook beneath their feet. The people stood in awe and fear, knowing they were about to encounter something greater than any miracle, the voice of God himself. Moses ascended the mountain alone. For 40 days and nights, he remained in the presence of the Almighty. When he returned, his face shone with divine radiance, carrying in his hands the covenant that would shape history forever, the 10 Commandments. These were not just rules, they were a revelation of God's holiness, a foundation for justice, and a guide for living as his chosen people. In that wilderness, the Israelites learned that freedom without faith leads to despair, but freedom with God leads to destiny. They were no longer defined by the chains of Egypt. They were no longer lost in fear. They were now a people bound by covenant, called to walk in righteousness, and destined to shine as a light to the nations. Their journey was far from over. The desert stretched on, and battles still lay ahead. Many would stumble, many would struggle, and their faith would be tested again and again. But the Exodus had taught them one unshakable truth: the same God who broke Pharaoh's pride and split the sea was with them still. He would not abandon them in the wilderness. The story of Moses and the Israelites is not just about a nation's escape from slavery. It is about God's unrelenting pursuit of his people. It is about a covenant sealed not by chains but by love. And it is about the eternal truth that when God delivers, he delivers completely, body, soul, and destiny. The wilderness was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater, the shaping of a people who would carry the promise of God into the world. The Exodus is not just a story locked in the past. It's a mirror held up to every generation. Pharaoh's pride lives on wherever power is abused, and the Red Sea still stands before us in the form of impossible challenges, overwhelming fears, and battles that seem too great to win. But just as God parted the waters then, he still makes a way today. The wilderness reminds us that freedom is more than escape. It is about transformation. It is about learning to trust, even when the desert feels endless. And it is about walking with the God who provides water from rocks, bread from heaven, and light in the darkest night. When we look back on this journey, from Pharaoh's throne to the crashing sea, from the hunger of the desert to the fire of Sinai, we see a God who is not distant, but deeply present. A God who fights for the oppressed, humbles the proud, and calls us into covenant with himself. So, the question is not just what happened to Egypt and Israel thousands of years ago. The real question is, what does the Exodus mean for you today? Where is your Red Sea? Where is your wilderness? And are you ready to trust the one who still parts waters and still writes his laws on willing hearts? If this story has inspired you, then don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button, join us on this journey, and let's keep uncovering the sacred path together.